Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. He comes to us from the great country of Switzerland. His name is Taki. He goes by Taki. He's just published a book fairly recently. If you're watching this on YouTube, X, Rumble, or Rockfin, you'll see the title, which is The Last Alpha Male. There is a subtitle, The Amorous Pursuits and High Life of a Poor Little Greek Boy. And he goes by Taki, Taki. He has a very long Greek last name, Theodoracopulos. But he's written for The Spectator or he did write for The Spectator for 50 years. And back in the day, I used to read his pieces, and that's back in the day when they had these things called newspapers. You would actually pick them up in the morning with your cup of coffee, and try to find things that were interesting. But I would say, it's fair to say he was a bon vivant and a wit, really kind of a funny guy, uh, critical of a lot of things. This is not his first book. He's written The Greek Upheaval, Kings, Demagogues, and Bayonets, High Life, Low Life, Princess Playboys, and High Class Tarts, Nothing to Declare, Prison Memoirs, and he's also accrued a series of his columns in Taki, The Spectator columns, 2001 and 2009. But we're going to talk about this book. I read through it. I got about half to two-thirds of the way through. Found it very interesting. He's like a historical figure. He knew so many people in our 20th century culture that I hope you can talk about. So, Taki, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's
For
nice to
people,
be.
good. I'm glad you're here. For people who may not be familiar with your name, your work, or all of your columns in The Spectator, maybe you can talk about your background. You have an American background for people who don't know, but talk about
Right.
your background and what led up to the
Well,
publication of The
I
Last
was
Album.
born. Yes, I was born just before the First World, the Second World War. My father was a major industrialist and a ship owner in Greece. That's why I make those jokes about being a poor little Greek boy. And after we left, I left Greece and I was sent to Lawrenceville School in America after the war and after the Civil War, where my father had a very good war record as an officer against the Italo-German armies, and then he fought the communists in Greece, which in a way formed me, because when I arrived in America, there was a tremendous amount of, I couldn't understand liberalism. Although I was only 12 years old or 11 years old, I couldn't understand liberalism because I had just seen a very vicious civil war, which of course I was on the right of the war, of the civil war. But what the communists did, they didn't kill us. They couldn't get to us. But what they did is they killed most of my father's workers. These were very poor people who worked very hard to feed their families. And I never understood how, if you're a communist, you can kill a fellow who makes the minimum amount of money working in a factory. Well, I could understand if they had killed us, but I didn't understand that the Americans somehow, or at least my fellow students at Lawrenceville, couldn't understand why I was so right wing, because they had never seen, they were born after the American Revolution and, of course, after the American Civil War. But that's what formed me. That's what made me be a conservative for the rest of my life, and still am, of course. Not out of protecting my interests, nor out of sort of I don't know how to explain it, but I saw when I was very young, and less than 10 years old, I saw what these people did to very poor people. They couldn't get to the rich because we had guns. We had, my father knew how to protect himself. He was an officer after all, and they never got to the rich section of Athens. So that that's one thing that I never understood, that other people would fail to understand. Throughout my 50 years of writing columns, I was always being attacked for being sort of conservative and right wing. Well, when you see what I saw when I was young, and I was very much protected, my life was never in danger or anything like that, then those things mark you for life, and you remain sort of very doubtful of liberals, of Uncle Joe Stalin, and the way people were they were worshiping communism back in those days. This was long before you were born, but I was around. And Uncle Joe, they called him Uncle Joe Stalin because he had beaten Hitler, which he had actually. The Russians won that the big contest. They were the ones who lost 10 million fighting him. But that's the first thing I have to say about my politics were formed when I was under 10 years old, and they were formed by sort of an experience which I hope not many people go through.
It's weird because it's kind of come around again in the United States, like a lot of Bolshevik ideas. But for people who don't know, the Greek Civil War after World War II was very brutal, very vicious.
Very brutal.
Oh, yeah.
It was very brutal because a lot of patriotic Greeks took to the mountains after we were attacked the 28th of October 1940 by Italy. We beat the Italians back into Albania. Then Hitler had to divert his attack on Russia. He had to delay it until the 1st of September. He had to come back and help his ally Mussolini. That's when we lost the war. And then, of course, a lot of patriotic Greeks took to the mountains. They were, of course, supported by Stalin throughout those 4 or 5 years of occupation. So when they came over to take power, they weren't exactly bad people, but they had been brainwashed by Stalin. They had been supported by Stalin. And of course, we looked almost like we were pro-Hitler because we were against him, but we were as much against Hitler as they were. So it was a very unfortunate civil war. There's a friend of mine who wrote Nicholas Gage. His name was Gatsoyan. He's changed, Americanized it. He wrote it. He worked for the New York Times. He wrote a book about how they killed his mother, and they made a film out of it. It was called, remember, Elena or something. Anyway, so it was a terrible thing, terrible visual. And now, of course, it's over. After 3 generations or 2 generations, it's over, because now when I go to Athens, nobody talks about, they talk about domestic politics. No one mentions the war anymore, not because they did for a very long time, and we were split for a very long time, but I'm very happy to say that this is all over now. And these are grandsons of people who fought on opposite sides, and nobody mentions this. So that's the good news.
But it is a very important piece of Greek history that you were born into in 1935. So you saw 36.
Don't make me even older than I am.
Sorry, I apologize. I'm working on memory. But so you went through World War II, but then your dad had the idea to educate you in the States, right?
Yes. Well, because there was the war went on to 1951, the Civil War. Athens was pretty safe. 47, the Americans came in with General Van Fleet, and as always, the Americans came in. They were blamed by everybody after 20 years. But if it weren't for the Americans, we'd all be speaking Russian now. But anyway, the Americans came in, kicked the communists out of the main cities, and took the war up north. When Tito closed the border in 1948, the war was over. I mean, practically was over. So my father sent us in 1947. My mother's father became prime minister and chief justice of the Supreme Court, so he sent us to America, where I arrived without speaking a single word of English. I spoke very good German. I spoke good Greek and a little bit of ancient Greek, but that was rough in the beginning, but it was all right.
So you went to boarding schools here in the States and then made it to UVA too.
Yes.
It was different back then, much more formal. You said everybody used to wear a tie, and
everybody wore
a tie.
Yeah, yeah. Not only that, I think by year UVA were the happiest ever, because first of all, I learned never to lie or cheat, because I did a hell of a lot of copying to get through prep school. But I'll tell you one thing, the honor system worked back then, and I joined the St. Elmo fraternity. And I was told, and I never lied, never cheated. The honor system worked, and we dressed coat and tie. And the only one who was allowed not to wear a tie at times was a man called George Finn. The reason why he was allowed was because he had fought in Korea and had come back. And the head of the house, Tommy Evans, was a congressman later on. Billy Cook, Budgie Perry, Jerry Folk, they were all wonderful, all Woodbury Forest boys from Virginia. And of course, that's what made me become such a fan of the South. Gone with the Wind South, it doesn't make me very popular nowadays. But it was wonderful. And I loved Virginia, and I was madly in love with two or three girls at Sweetbriar, which we used to drive to every night to see them. From Virginia and drive back, arrive 4 o'clock, go to class at 8. It was wonderful. And I was on a book tour for Nothing to Declare, I think, or maybe, I don't know. Anyway, I was on a book tour and I was on the Larry King show. And during a break, there was a telephone call. And this lady said, Taki? I said, yes. She said, my name is Mary Blair Scott. Do you remember me? I said, do I remember you? I haven't slept in 35 years thinking of you. And she laughed and we talked. She was a Southern Belle. She was the prettiest girl at Sweetbriar. And then when I said to her, can I come to see you in Richmond? She said, I've been married. I'm married. I have 4 children. Why don't you just stay with the memory, which I thought was straight out of F. Scott Fitzgerald and wonderful. And that was the last time I spoke to her, but it was great stuff.
Right, and back in the day, the UVA was still, all men, right? So
All
you
men,
had to
all
go.
men, all
Yeah,
men,
so
only men, all under the. Every once in a while, you'd read something in the university paper. A student has left the university due to the honor system. You know, somebody had lied or been caught, but it was wonderful. And I've never seen such. I've never had such a wonderful such souvenirs. We'd all drive to Florida in the spring. You know, the usual things would happen, and it was formal and it was maybe elitist, but that's
it's
I
still a
certainly
it was a state school back then, right? I mean, it's still
always
considered a state.
state
Yeah, yeah,
school
yeah.
with that wonderful serpentine walk that Thomas Jefferson had designed, the rotunda. He was our first. And then when I read that they were trying to cancel Thomas Jefferson, I literally wanted to drive to Virginia and shoot this guy, whoever he was, some lefty student who wanted to get rid of Thomas Jefferson. So
Yeah, it's unbelievable stuff. Like, I mean, it's crazy things are going on, in my opinion, in Virginia right now. But
I
you
know.
claim that that was one of the most beautiful places on earth, and you've seen a lot of different places.
Well, what's wonderful about post-war, after the First World War, you had the Roaring Twenties. Remember, and everybody, the Fitzgeralds and everybody went crazy. After the Second World War, you had the really, I would call them the fabulous 50s. All the South Americans who had a lot of money because everybody in Europe had come to Europe, and the Italian and German miracle were coming about. So in the 50s, when I hit Paris, I was a tennis player playing for Greece. Uh, it was just wonderful. London was a terrible place, with all sorts of controls and bad weather and ugly teeth and whatever you want to call it was. Paris was suddenly had recovered. There were balls after balls. I'll give you a very brief example. Tell me if I'm being too loquacious. There was a ball given by Countess Rochambeau. So I didn't know many people in Paris. I was invited. It was a black tie, and I arrived there in the beautiful chateau in the country. And when I was introduced to her, I bowed to her, and I said to her, Countess, how come you invited me? She said, well, I heard that you were all right looking, that you had very good manners, and I'd like to come here. I was 20. And she said, and incidentally, my name before I became Countess Rochambeau was Sheila McIntosh from Kentucky. And she was wonderful. She was very, well, plumb. And she was great and laughing. And she's still with us. She's close to 100. And of course, she was she had married the descendant of a great American hero. General Rochambeau was even more effective than Lafayette. He won the Battle of Yorktown. He's the one who brought the fleet down and trapped the Brits. And great American hero. So I recently was writing, I'm saying, the French hate everybody, but they had Rochambeau and Lafayette on our side, so forget them. I wrote an article about how the Brits are always envious of the Americans, and they're always screaming. And now, of course, with Trump, once he said that they'd all be speaking German, which they would have. I only read right-wing papers, and they were all screaming. They're so envious of America. I like to quote them sometimes because it really shows what they're really like. They never forgot 1776, Yorktown, even the Treaty of Ghent. I don't know.
It's an interesting thing for your life is that you became a writer. That was kind of not to be expected from your dad. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, he actually said to me, he said, "Don't you realize that to be a journalist is to be a blackmailer?" And I said, he he obviously had bad experiences with journalists, but he said to me, and then Charles Moore, who's now Lord Moore, who was editor of this, I had 7 editors. I outlived, I mean, I outstayed 7. He said to me, Charles Moore said, we're one step above child molesters. Well, I saw it differently because Arno de Boergraaf was a famous Belgian who made it top foreign journalist top foreign correspondent for Newsweek in those days. As you said in the introduction, when they had newspapers and magazines, it was a lot of fun. I just didn't want to be another ship owner's son going into shipping. They all did. They still all do. All Greeks go into shipping.
Yeah, Onassis, all that stuff, right?
Well, no, all of them. And I mean, why not? Thank God, because that's how the business remains in the families. But I just wanted something different, and I was very lucky to get it. And a lot of help from Arno de Boergraaf, and of course, Bill Buckley.
Right. So it was William Buckley. You had I think Christopher Buckley, his son, is still writing. But it
Yes.
took you to a lot of different places in your life. Like you interviewed Eldridge Cleaver and Algeria, London, all these foreign places.
Well, yeah, I went twice to Vietnam for Bill, and then I went to Algeria. I remember I interviewed Eldridge Cleaver, and it was a cover story for National Review, because actually, if I may use that word on the air, you might blot it out. I was there, and I finally got to see him, and he liked me. I'm personal. This is 30 years, 40 years ago. Anyway, he was there in exile, but Boumediene had locked them all up because he wasn't going to allow black revolutionaries to sort of taint his revolution. They thought they were going to go there because he offered them asylum. But anyway, they were locked up in a house. Anyway, he said to me, "Boy, what would I give for a hamburger and a piece of ass?" So I said to him, "Mr. Cleaver, all you have to do is go back to America. You can have both there. And your wife is a great beauty." I mean, I said to him, "I look at her pictures and I envy you." Anyway, he tried to intimidate me. When I said to him, I thought his wife was beautiful. I don't intimidate easily. So we laughed. At the end, he laughed and he came back and did his time. And he ended
Yeah, I
up.
read Soul. The reason it struck me is I read Soul on Ice when I was in college a long time ago, 30 years ago. So it was interesting. A lot of people ended up in North Africa, Leary
Sure.
and Weather Underground people and a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing is that you mentioned Jodie Foster in this, which I just interviewed John Hinckley. So it was kind of interesting
Oh
to
my
see her
God.
name
Yeah.
pop up. Yeah.
Well, I don't know her. I've had dinner with her a couple of times because of common friends in London. But I remember sitting at the Clay Felker. I was writing for Esquire, and I was at a desk. So I went to the Xerox machines had just arrived. So I went, somebody told me, you go there, you put the paper in, and you get a copy. So I went there and I saw this rather plumpish behind leaning over. So I said to this guy afterwards, I didn't, that's not a bad looking girl. He said, it's Jodie Foster, you fool. So back I went to the machine and I said to her, stand aside for writers. And she gave me a dirty look. She couldn't have been nicer. She's a person of the left, because when we had dinner together in London, not with me, she was with a friend, and I was some. It was very funny because she remembered. She remembered. She said, and then this is purely name dropping. She said to me, we were outside Annabelle's. We were going into Annabelle's, which was then a top nightclub, the best nightclub in London, and you had to be a member. So as we were going in, she said, do you mind if there's a young actor who's called, he doesn't know many people, do you mind if I bring him along? I said, well, where is he? We were right in front of the club. He said, it's him. And there was this tiny little man, young man, and I looked at him, he was wearing a T-shirt. So I said to him, I'm sorry, old boy, but you can't come in like this. You need a coat and tie. You need a suit. And he said, could I borrow one? I said, well, no, first of all, much too big for you. And second of all, I live far away. And that was a young man called Tom Cruise. I never saw him again, but I remember with a T-shirt. And this must be 1986, wow. 86, 87, yeah. That's the last time I saw Jodie, too.
That's amazing. I mean, these people have gone on to just incredible careers. I mean,
incredible careers.
Yeah,
and I mean, nobody will know if it's true or not what I just said, but I said, I'm not a celebrity fan, but he couldn't have been nicer. But how do you go to London with a T-shirt on? I guess now you do, but back then, no. Anyway,
that's one of the interesting things about your life is you met so many actors, many of them early young, but also so many like wealthy families and the Agnellis, all these names that popped up were really incredible. Porfirio, Rubirosa, Sinatra.
Well, he was best man when I got married, Porfirio Rubirosa, and I played polo with him, and we used to go every day. He said to me once, you come to my house, you're going to stay in my house. I just got married. He said, I don't, he lived in a very grand house, very fully staffed, used to give big parties. But he said to me, I'm running out of money, so I can't give you a wedding present. And I said, well, I don't need a wedding present. He said, my wedding present is you come and stay in my house. He spoke like that with a South American accent. So we'd go there in the morning. He'd get up, and before breakfast we'd go in. He had a ring inside one of his big rooms, and would box. He would go, you can't hit here, and you can't hit here, you can hit here. I said, Ruby, only here. So he would tee off on me, and I could only bag him in the arms. Then we'd have breakfast, we'd get into his Ferrari, cross the bridge where he actually was killed, and school the ponies, because the polo club was just across the Seine into the Bagatelle in the park. It was a wonderful life, and it ended on the 6th of July, 1965, when he came back drunk, drove the Ferrari and hit a tree. And I remember in his obituary, Parry Match wrote, if he only bumped his head and just killed him. If he'd been wearing his seatbelt, he'd be alive. But had he been wearing his seatbelt, he wouldn't have been Rubirosa.
Right. Like that was incredible life. He's kind of lost to kind of modern history and modern American
completely.
history.
Yeah.
But he was
really
my
big mentor was Gianni Agnelli, who was a fabulous character and very much a gentleman. Gianni didn't like Ruby because Ruby, after all, had married 3 of the richest women in the world, the Trujillo girl, then Doris Duke, then Barbara Hutton. And, let's face it, he was the world's great gigolo. But when you think the most he ever made was $5 million, now you have this gay man, young, who was a great friend of Alexandra, my wife. They were young, all came from a good background and all that. he took the lady who has all those how do you call the she's the richest woman in France. He took something like 2 billion. Remember, she gave him 5. He had to give 3 billion back. I mean, I say, my God, here's Ruby, my hero, my buddy, and all he made was 5 million off 3 of the richest women. And this guy doesn't even like women. He makes 2 billion.
Something.
What's the name?
Oh, right. Was
Yeah,
it
anyway,
Home or something? I can't remember. But yeah, it's interesting these lives of this guy Ruberosa. He was kind of like a modern day Casanova, who you mentioned in your book. So this
right.
kind of these courtesans, but they're not all like, I don't think history has seen how multifaceted they were. Would you agree with that?
Exactly. But William, do you know that the Prince de Ligne was a famous diarist in the 18th century? And the Prince de Ligne said, he wrote, and what's his name? What's his name? I can't.
Prince Deline. I don't know who that is.
Edmund Wilson, the great critic. Yeah. Edmund Wilson. He said that Casanova was far more interesting than Rousseau, Frederick the Great, Louis XV, because he knew all these people. He had read them. He knew them. He said Casanova was just one of the great, and he only wrote one book. It was his memoir. And of course, but Casanova was an extremely well-educated person whose tragedy of life was that he was born, his mother was a stage actress and he never knew who his father was and all this. But apparently he had a fantastic brain, but because of his propensity for hookers, just nobody took him seriously. But
right, they just took him seriously as a lover, not as an intellectual or a cultural.
No, right. And basically, he hated that. He was an intellectual, and his confessions were very, very. But I know because Prince Celine was my favorite historian. Anyway, but Gianni Agnelli, to get back to him, was the most charismatic figure after the war. He had a good war. He fought, of course, with the Italians in Russia. And he was a terrific, he owned Fiat, a terrific art collection, terrific houses. He was extremely good looking himself. All he did was, I remember his big thing was how to hide his luxurious life. He built a boat once. I remember an enormous boat that looked like a tug. People do it now all the time, but he was the first one to do it. And on the maiden voyage, and this was when they were blowing everybody up in Italy, and the Red Brigades were killing the rich.
Days of Lead or whatever it was, yeah.
Right, but he never had bodyguards. He drove himself very fast. You never knew what he was going to do, and he was very difficult to pin down. But anyway, he had this boat because they didn't want the newspapers to show him going into and out of stuff. He always had sailing boats anyway, beautiful small sailing boats. But in this boat, he could hide himself. It looked like a tug. And I was on the maiden voyage. Out we came from Villefranche, and the boat started to pick up speed. And just then a Chris craft went by with some girls who took off their tops, and they yelled, "Ciao, Johnny." In other words, 100 yards into the sea, and he was already recognized because you couldn't very well miss it. So I'll never forget. He said, "There goes $18 million." He thought it was good.
I don't know if the rich and famous are the same they were in the 50s or 60s. That seemed like a different year. I think it was just part of the 50s optimism after World War II. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree with you, William. But look at this. I wrote about when Jeff Bezos got married in Venice this summer. I don't know Jeff Bezos, and I don't know the Kardashians and all those people. But I read that there were counter demonstrations and people screaming. So I wrote an article for Taki, which is my website now, I write for the American Conservative. I wrote an article saying I went to 2 grand balls in Venice in the 50s and 60s, the Volpi balls. And I remember as a young man coming out of the gondola to go into the palazzo, and people locals were cheering. They were clapping us, and I said, "Why are they clapping us? We're nobodies." This is to show, because then people admired whatever you call glamour, or they admired money or whatever. Now people resent everything. So I thought Bezos had very bad taste to do it in Venice, but that's his business. I'm not criticizing. I couldn't care less. But in those days, society was different because it acted differently too. Society was very well behaved, meaning what they did was in the bedroom, and it stayed in the bedroom. The bad things they did stayed private. Now people behave badly openly. So I guess I don't know, but I remember it struck me that we were cheered coming out of a gondola, going into a ball when people were very poor back then. And now where people are not so poor, they sit there and they scream and they throw insults at that stuff that, mind you, we didn't have Kardashians or people like that all dressed up and showing off in those days, but still.
It seems like a more conspicuous consumption in Bezos, like it's over the top. I mean, in Venice or in Caribbean, they show up with these huge yachts. They're just extraordinary. Like, what do you really need?
No,
that?
not only huge yachts, and they have another yacht where the crew lives and where all the machines are. I mean, it's just terrible.
Yeah,
and believe me, I'm always on the side of the yachtsman, but it's no fun. I've been on those boats. First of all, you don't feel at all. I've never owned a boat like that. I've only owned sailing boats, because you feel there's a big difference sleeping on a bunk next to the sea and sleeping in an air-conditioned 25 cabin super yacht, which you never even sometimes even see the sea, with 30 crew, with thick carpets. No, that's just conspicuous showing off. That's all it is. It's not. Nobody needs as those big boats. They rock, funny enough, more than the small ones do. So if anybody tells you I'm seasick, that's why I have a big boat, it's BS. The bigger the boat, the more it rocks. So no excuse for that. Just typical conspicuous consumption and showing off.
Right. And you've seen these kind of like things where revolution or leftist ideas were in vogue, things like that. You talk about Jane Seberg. It seems like they come around cyclically. Would you agree with that? And what's your take? Yeah.
Well, I tell you, I think it's less so now, because don't forget that while the Soviet Union existed, they paid tremendous amount of money, and a lot of people, journalists I know, have come out now and have accepted the fact that the Soviet Union had a lot of money and paid off a hell of a lot of journalists. I'm sorry to say that, but the journalists that took Soviet gold, and they wrote some terrific stuff for The Guardian and for all the left-wing Le Monde and all the Greek newspapers. And of course, that during the Cold War, there were so many socialites played along, especially in Paris and in London. To be left-wing was chic. To be right-wing was old-fashioned and stupid and whatever you want to call it, fascist, whatever. I never changed, but you'd be amazed at the amount of people I knew, especially young people in Paris who came from very la-di-da, good backgrounds, who were very left-wing. But don't forget that they read newspapers and they read news, and a lot of journalists, sorry to say, were on the take. There was nothing illegal about it. But the difference was that the capitalists never paid journalists. They try, but usually successfully or not, I don't know. But if you're writing for, let's say, the Wall Street Journal, you don't expect that some big shot or James Diamond called you up to ask you for a favorite piece. Well, the Soviets did. And a lot of them have come out. Nobody will know any names I can mention now. And most of them are forgotten also, because communism has been dead almost for 30 years now. But before that, the battle to be on the side of, let's say, very left wing was very chic, very chic. I remember Barry Diller with the Unfused, where they came, the Alpha was in there. They came on board this boat, and there was writing for Bill Buckley, and I remember him, who plays the big shot now. He said to me, "How can you work for Buckley? He's almost a fascist." I answered with the F word for him to go and do that, which he probably would have liked to. But I got so angry because there's a big difference between being a conservative and being a fascist. Fascist far closer to the left than we are. And of course, but he was just trying to be chic. Barry Diller is on the side of Soviets. Of course not. He wants to, he's a shark and a multi-billionaire, and he'll eat you alive if you can. But of course, and I remember it distinctly when he came on board. I felt sorry because I didn't think he knew. He was on board the Amorous, a beautiful Creole, 180-foot schooner. And the first thing he said is, "Oh, how can you work for Buck?" The next thing I know, it was pictures with Bill Buckley all over the place. But anyway, so the double standard, people always played left wing. It was chic to play left wing. And Hollywood led the way. And the New York Times and Vogue and all those Newhouse papers led the way. It was always chic to be left. The New Yorker was a wonderful paper. Now it's completely very left-wing magazine. Why is that? Because it's chic. And
It's still the same way, I think. I think it's still
Of
chic. A
course
lot of
it
these
is.
people, it's like a persona, a presentation.
Sure. Anna Wintour, I've known her for years, since 40 years. I think I'm the only man who ever made her cry because I got so angry at the crap she was spouting. Anna Wintour works for the new houses. It's got, but it's chic to be left wing. She's still that way, and they will never admit, they have no rapport with a hard-working guy in Mississippi. Nothing to do with them. The only who buys them wannabes in New York and Los Angeles. So, William, you know that better than I do. So when they say, talk about the common man, they wouldn't know a common man if they ran across him. They wouldn't recognize him. They'd think it's some actor. Anyway,
it's really true. They're really just in their own bubble. You've been around. You've seen a lot of different sex scandals. You wrote about the Profumo affair. You've seen a lot of these people's personal behavior, and you wrote about Epstein as well. Can you talk about that?
Well, the funny thing is, I never missed a column for 46 years in the Spectator. I liked writing once a week, and I used to write 3 or 4 columns a week for different. So one time there was I wrote about Epstein because I was seeing some girl who said to me, "Epstein would like to meet you," and I said, "I don't want to meet a pimp, blackmailing pimp or something." I called him all sorts of names, and she said, "How can you say these things?" I said, "I can tell. This guy's a scumbag. There's nothing worse." I've never met the guy. I lived literally 200 yards down from the street from me. I lived on 71st and Park, and he was on 71st, and between 5th and Madison, and I was between Park and Madison. So I've never seen him, but I'd heard enough that I always thought you don't go from high school education to become an advisor to Wexner and all these big shots. He became an advisor because he was either blackmailing them or pimping for them. There's no in between. You don't become an advisor to people who have 10 times your education and your experience in business and money. And I remember recently, about 3 months ago, I sat next to this man called Black from Apollo. What's his first name? William, he got into trouble with.
I think was it Baron Black or something like that? Is he from Canada? The guy from Canada?
No. That's Conrad Black.
Conrad Black. Yeah,
No. This guy's a big shot, the big black male with his girlfriend, Russian girlfriend. Anyway, I was seated next to him. I found him very unpleasant. He didn't, and the feeling was mutual. He didn't like me either. Anyway, we're at a private dinner, so nothing happened. But he his emails have all been published in all the newspaper, the few newspapers left, where he's saying, why should I justify to me, why should I be paying you $3.5 million a year? This is to Epstein. But obviously, I mean, a black build-up Apollo to a multi-billion-dollar business. Why does he need a guy with a high school diploma, perhaps, to advise him in business? It was obviously pimping for him or blackmailing him, or one of the two. I didn't want to bring it up because my hostess that day is a great friend of mine. I didn't want to bring up, obviously, his friendship. But I always knew that about Epstein. And the only column that was ever spiked, and spiked meaning killed, was because I had written that. This is 2 years before he killed himself. In other words, they were scared because he was known that he would sue if you call them certain names. But I said to them, when they called up and said, we can't publish this, I said, I'll take care of the lawsuit, because I knew he would never go to court against me, because I would say, everything would have come out. But, editors are notoriously cowardly. They're afraid of lawyers. Anyway, that was the only column that was ever spiked that I wrote. And it's a pity, because I had him down exactly what it emerged that he was: a blackmailing, pimp, pedophile, and child molester. And that's what he was. I remember when that girl said to me, she wants to meet you. Do you want to ride her his plane? I said, I don't want to meet child molesters. I don't want to meet black men. I used every adjective I knew. She said, oh, all right. I said,
Do you use that as an example, this Apollo person who did the Apollo fund paying 3.5
yes.
million? Do you think that was endemic? Do you think that there's tens or hundreds of those types of wealthy people?
Well,
who
with
paid
him, no,
Epstein?
I think that he knew very well. I can't mention the name now because for you, not for me, I don't care. But let's say one of his major backers, they're very Jewish, very pro-family, very religious, and probably he likes boys too. He has a family, married, and all that. That's the type of guy that he could do things with. He could blackmail or make available certain things. Because there are a lot of people, just because a man likes boys, that it's not a capital offense. He can do whatever he likes. But he happens to be Jewish, which is a very religious family. He's not from New York State. I don't want to mention the name because he might go after you. And so that's the kind of people that he homed in on, who had a very good family and nice children and grandchildren, and were very proper people. And of course, he could see their weakness or their strength, whatever, and he took it. That's what I think. But of course,
interesting.
Yeah,
Leon Black. I think that's the name we forgot.
exactly.
Leon, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Somebody in the comments mentioned that. If some of these comments, do you have time for a few questions, Taki?
Sure.
Blues Johns is asking, how powerful was Onassis? Are you familiar with a lot of the? I mean, you mentioned actually Jacqueline Onassis.
Yeah, well, I knew Onassis very well. He couldn't have been nicer with me when I was very young. I think it was after my girlfriend. He could not have been more sweet. I remember he took me home. I lived at the Sherry, Netherlands. With my parents had a flat there, and I said, I cannot go up at 4:30. My father will kill me. I was still in school, so he said, I'll go up with you. So I remember my father opening the door with his dressing gown on, and he said, Ari, Gianni. Anyway, they laughed. He said, look, I kept the boy up, things like that. Now, you don't forget that. I was 16. You don't forget things like that. And major top tycoons don't do things like that. No, he was a very nice man. He had a rough side to him, but that's, we all do.
And he kind of had a kind of tragedy too. I think you mentioned his daughter kind of tragically.
Well, he lost his son. He lost his son because Alexander, they put something on, he was a good flyer, and they put something the wrong way. In other words, when you wanted to go left, it went right, and vice versa. So as he left the Athens airport, there's a hill there, so he turned left to get away from it, and the plane, of course, went right into the hill, and he died like that. And typically they found out, everybody said, oh, the Americans killed him because of Jackie. I think bullshit. He was total crap. He was just the thing that makes the thing go left and right was put on the wrong way by some bloody mechanic, and the boy killed himself. Then his daughter, of course, died after his death. So he didn't see that. She blew up. She had 35. She had more Diet Cokes per day than our president, our 47th president, has in a week.
Wow.
So.
Wow. Yeah, I think she was heavily involved in substances, is a way to put
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Bibe Rebozo ask him about Prince Andrew. Do you have any thoughts about him?
Well, I've met him a couple of times. He's very boorish. He has very good manners, obviously. I don't know him at all, but I've sat at the same table with him at some parties. He's boorish. I don't think he deserves. First of all, I had no idea that his older brother, who I don't like, could take his title away from him. Since when? Anyway, the Brits do anything that suits them. I think he's got a raw deal. He fought well in the Falklands. He flew decoy helicopters to decoy the planes that were attacking. The Argies were good pilots because, and I think he doesn't deserve the abuse he's getting from the Fourth Estate. Every cheap journalist attack him nonstop now. I don't think he was particularly a nice person, but he never bothered anybody. I don't believe anything about he paid 12 million and then the suit continues. I've never understood that. And I'm sorry if the girl says, he probably did go with a girl, but since when in real life do you ask a girl that could be 18 or 17 or 19 when she's presented to you by Mr. Epstein and Miss Maxwell, whom I knew well? I mean, I think he got a raw deal. He's not as bad as the press make him out to be. That's all.
Interesting. What's your thought about Ghislaine? I mean, do you think she was the smarter one between her and Epstein?
No.
Okay.
Ghislaine was taken seriously by the Brits because her father, everybody thought, was multi-billionaire. her attitude changed after it was discovered that he was a crook, and that's all he was, and a bully and not a nice person. And she came to America and she had to remake herself. She became extremely nice. I've written this. I remember I was with my wife. We're sitting in a cafe in Saint-Tropez, and my boat was there with all the crew. And she came up and she said, "Please, can you come to this party I'm giving?" And we were both a little bit, how do you say, when you're just allergic to her, because she was very much sort of working like a PR person, and I was never. So I remember I said, "We'd love to, but we're leaving. Look, the crew is ready. We're all going to leave." And of course, Alexandra said to me afterwards, "Now we have to leave." And I said, "No." She said, "Come on, it's very rude." So we got up and we left. I lost my beautiful space in port, and we went down. So anyway, no, she was not. She was. She just hung on to him, and I think the newspapers, most of them, have it right. She's not as bad as some of them say, and she's not. She's no saint. But 20 years, I think, was a lot. She deserved less prison time, I think.
I don't know if you can see this, but that's Taki's magazine. So it's talkymag.com right there. And that's you practicing.
Well, we're now with the American Conservative. Taki Mag has been taken over by the American Conservative, which I also started in 2003 to stop the war in Iraq, along with Pat Buchanan and and Scott McConnell. But anyway, in those days, I could fly like that. No longer.
Gotcha. And then the book, The Last Alpha Male, is available right now on Amazon, right?
Amazon, yeah, you can buy it on Amazon.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add or anything I missed? I've talked to you now for about 50 minutes, and we've had a lot of live listeners and a lot of questions and stuff like that. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
You've been most wonderful host, and I want to thank the listeners and you for having me. And that's all. And I described this book as I wrote that some fool in Greece called Taki called it the greatest book ever written, after the Bible, of course. And somebody took it seriously and wrote a very rude note to me saying, "How can I was making fun of myself, of course. Anyway, it's a fun book. The pictures are very good too.
It's very
Thank you very
funny
much
and
for having me.
very first person, and it's a difference than this kind of shrill,
Oh
judgmental mentality that's out there
no,
today. It's
no.
like,
I think it's
yeah,
important to have fun in life.
yeah, I think you're right. It's such a difference than just this kind of like condemnatory culture we have now, and going, it's
Yes,
just
you're
stifling.
very true. Condemnatory culture, and everybody seems to be so depressed.
Yeah,
And let's say long ago, when people had very little money and very little comforts, everybody seemed to be in much better mood,
yeah.
less
Everybody's in
angry.
a bad mood, and that's
Yeah,
what you wrote in the last chapter. It was like, we are now prisoners of a stifling
yeah.
cultural uniformity. I think that's really true. So
And
it's a great way to end the book. Yeah.
yeah.
Taki, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate
No,
it.
I thank you. No, I thank you, and I thank the listeners for putting up with me. And thank you very much. And very quickly, just at the end of the book, I'm never forget. I was 14 years old, 15 years old, and this very pretty girl came up to me, and she saw me reading the Tender as the Night in English, and she spoke to me in English. She was Greek, but she spoke in English. She said, "This book will ruin your life." And I said, "I sure hope so." Some professor reviewing the book about a month ago in America thought it was. I gave her a good answer, because I remember I was caught reading the book too in study hall at Blair after I was kicked out of Lawrenceville. And I remember that Mr. Chase said, "I bet you it's a dirty book. Let me see it." So I gave him the book, and all he said was, "Keep reading it." Well, wonderful. America was and is a wonderful country. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Again, the guest is Taki, and the new book is The Last Alpha Male, The Amorous Pursuits and High Life of a Poor Little Greek Boy. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, stay there, stay there, stay there. Don't go anywhere. Don't hang up.